Hello, a very warm good morning to all of you, and welcome to Unacademy. Welcome to today's The Hindu newspaper analysis, where we take a look at the daily edition of today's The Hindu newspaper, analyze the articles relevant for the examination, and why this is going to be a different kind of an analysis as is available on all the other mediums, because here you also get a point-wise summarization of those articles that you can use for your answer writing and for your revision purposes as well. Along with that, we are also going to consider the PIB articles which have been in news, and as per yesterday's publication of PIB, again to keep you updated for the prelims examination as well. So this session is a holistic and a must-watch session for everyone appearing for the examination, for the mains exam, or even for the examination in 27 or 28. Having said that, we will cover close to around 14 articles today, in brief, in detail, depending upon the requirement. So, first of all, FCRA Bill expanding the state control over civil society. Now, this is about the new FCRA Amendment Bill. We will consider some of the issues which have come into light because of this, that has been expressed in the article, and that is relevant for your GS paper 2. Implementation complete, but workers still vulnerable. This is about the implementation of the new labor codes and how those new labor codes, they still have a lot of lacunae in terms of addressing what is the wage, what is the case of the number of contracts that the FTE employees can have, that is the full term employees can have, and so on. So this is relevant even in terms of the economic parameters. So this is vital for your GS paper 2 and your GS paper 3 also. Then after that, laws of the land. This is about the rejection of the Rajya Sabha nomination and the Rajya Sabha election by the Congress, by the of the Congress candidate. Now, why it has been done and how it is not in a good spirit of law is what the article argues. That is again relevant for your GS paper 2. Should India incentivize larger families? Now, this is again a follow up to the articles that have been discussed previously about Andhra Pradesh doling out cash incentives in order to have larger families, cash incentives to the tune of 30,000 to 40,000. Now, should India incentivize larger families? This becomes relevant for your GS paper 1 as well as for your GS paper. Why is Nicobar debating elections? So basically, the administration council in the region has talked about bringing newer types of or newer methodology of election, something which is followed in the rest of the country. But here, the tribal councils, they have a reservation, they have a fear that their traditional mechanism and methodology is going to be lost. So this gets relevant for your GS paper 2 again. So that is basically the case of the articles which we will discuss in a slightly greater detail. Then some of them for the prelims, and we have five of the articles that we are going to be discussing even for the from the section of the PIB. So that is going to be a comprehensive discussion. Having said that, now many of you who are preparing for the examination, you do have a requirement of coverage of base. So, keeping that in mind, we have come up with certain sessions free of cost for you so that you can avail those sessions, you can participate in those sessions, and you can ensure that the preparation starts now and also in the best possible manner. And there are initiatives in geography, in economy, as well as in history. So, in geography, for example, we will start pre classes, that basics of geography through maps. So, you can scan this QR code and you can join the session. So, the session will be free of cost on the app, available to everyone. Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, 6 p.m. to 7 p.m. We are going to cover the entirety of the world geography, the mapping portion, the entirety of the portion of Indian geography as well, all the continents, the rivers, everything. But before that, it is also important for you to look into how to study the atlas, what to look for in the atlas. So we have come up with a YouTube session, advisable for you to check it out. how to cover an atlas, what is the concentric circle method of covering a particular region, what is a layering method of covering the map. Once you understand these scientific approaches, map pointing becomes very easy. In economy as well, we have come up with class 12th Indian economy NCRT starting from 12th of June. That is today, 5 p.m. to 6 p.m. Okay, on Unacademy platform, scan the QR code and join the session. So 6 p.m. to 7 p.m. geography, 5 p.m. to 5 p.m. to 6 p.m. will be your economy sessions. Overall, the aim is to facilitate your preparation in the best possible way, accessible to everyone. Now, coming to the first article of the day, FCRA Bill expanding state control over civil society. Now, this is something relevant for your GS paper too. Now, when we talk about the FCRA, FCRA is what? Foreign Contributions Regulations Act, right? So it ends up determining the rules and the regulations of any kind of foreign contribution which is done, foreign funding in that manner, which is done for the civil society organization. Now, I want you to understand some of the context behind it so that you are able to then appreciate the drawbacks and also you can get a view of the way forward. First of all, when we talk about the civil society organizations, right, and NGOs. Now, these are the prime areas where, and many of them are basically driven by the foreign contribution. You have donors abroad who basically provide money, and that allows for the functioning and the running of these civil society organizations. Now, as per certain estimates, the number of people employed by these and finding some or the other kind of job in these civil society organizations and NGOs amount to close to around 27 lakh, plus minus 2 to 3 lakhs. You can keep that data error aspect as well. But that is what the article argues, that it has close to around 27 lakh people who are employed directly or indirectly. So it is a substantial chunk of population that we talk about. Now, this population and the civil society organizations, they basically cater to the areas of healthcare in certain cases, women welfare, child care, schooling and education, and other measures in terms of improving the condition of neglected population and so on. And that has always been a kind of a noble task, right? This is one side of the argument. The other side of the argument. Now, because these organizations oftentimes do such charitable tasks, the law has always also been slightly kinder to them. But that has changed over the past decade and a half. Reason being, the Intelligence Bureau, in multiple of its reports, had cited that these organizations are being used in order to channelize and in order to basically reroute money, black money in many of the cases, illegal money in many of the cases, and that is used in order to upend or many of the times disturb the existing political structure, the socio-economic order, and also in certain cases the forced conversions. That has been the argument. Furthermore, this was deepened when almost a decade and a half, when you had the establishment or the process of setting up of the Kudankulam nuclear power plant off the coast of Tamil Nadu. At the time of the setting up of the plant, Tamil Nadu government, the central government of the other party, that is the UPA, was in power. So the Tamil Nadu government and the central government were hell bent that this particular nuclear power plant is very, very essential for the energy security of not only the region but of the entirety of the country. And this power plant, Kudankulam nuclear power plant, was being partnered with Russia. Now there were huge amount of protests, continued protests, and various different types of attempts to sabotage the implementation of the construction of the plant. At that point of time, Intelligence Bureau again stirred up the pot by saying that some of these protests are being funded by the US backed companies. Which companies? The nuclear power plant companies like Westinghouse House, who wanted this project to be disrupted and the bringing in of the US nuclear power plants. So, why I'm telling you all of this? The reason that you need to know all of this is because you need to have a context that if, let's suppose, the government is acting in such a way, now what is the mindset that the government is thinking about? Whether that is correct or incorrect, that is open to interpretation and that we will be discussing. But then, when the government came into power, they saw these NGOs and civil society organizations as the appropriate route for channelizing these funds, black money, money laundering, protests, fueled protests, etc. So they painted a kind of a picture that these have to be regulated, these have to be brought under control. And that is where the FCRA regulations, which have been issued since that point of time, have kept on becoming stranger and stranger with the passage of time. As a consequence of that, many of the very charitable NGOs, many of the very noble NGOs and civil society organizations which were doing good work but who did not have such a large manpower which could take care of the bureaucratic hurdles, which could take care of the proper file work, etc. Many of these NGOs, they have lost their licenses because of the failure of adherence to these FCRA regulations. Now, these FCRA regulations, the amendment which has been introduced on 25th of March 2026, that makes it much more stringent. And the article argues that these stringent provisions will make it almost impossible for the civil society organizations and the NGOs to function in the country. So that is basically the background. Okay. Now we will have a point-wise gist analysis. Use that for your answer writing and for your revision. Okay. First things first. The FCRA Amendment Bill 2026, which was introduced in on 25th of March 2026, the purpose of it was what? The purpose of it basically to control the amount of foreign funding. Now, is foreign funding necessarily bad? Absolutely not. But then, should it be through proper legalized channels? Absolutely yes. That is the purpose. But then, the process oftentimes becomes the punishment. So, here, vesting of foreign contribution and assets in certain cases. Now, in this case, foreign sources include governments of foreign countries or their agencies, foreign companies, trusts, societies, or citizens of foreign countries. Now, here, basically, a registration certificate of an NGO or a civil society organization will be deemed to have ceased, ended, if no application of renewal is made in time, renewal has been denied because of certain provision, renewal is not obtained before expiry. So there are these kind of provisions which basically will be very difficult for smaller civil society organizations which are dependent on foreign funding to operate. So let us discuss them threadbare. This will be available to you, the annotations of the PDF when you download. This will be available to you. Go through this. This is a summarization of the bill, and that is as per the PRS legislative, a very reliable source. So go through it and read it. But having said that, I have summarized it in this slide as well. So it introduced so this follows the 2020 FCRA amendment. 2020 FCRA amendment already has led to many of the civil society organizations unable to access funding and closing down. Why? The 2020 amendments basically introduced mandatory routing of all the foreign funds through a single bank branch. That means if, let's suppose, I have an organization in Mumbai, you have an organization in Bangalore. I am receiving funding from France. You are receiving funding from Germany. Regardless of that, the funding has to be rerouted through a single bank branch. And that is New Delhi, SBI branch of New Delhi. Reduction of administrative expenditure limits. from 50% to 20%. The aim, again, because many of the times the NGOs, the dubious ones, they would cite this as a inflated administrative cost and they would read out some of the money. So in that case, even the innocent ones, they get targeted. Restrictions on sub-granting of funds to the smaller organizations, expanded powers to suspend NGO registrations. So this was basically the 2021, right? Now coming to 2026. So here, shift from regulation to the case of state control. Okay. Now, the new bill introduces a chapter 3A, right? And it replaces the existing asset management provisions which are there about how you manage the assets overall. So it transforms the FCRA from a regulatory law to an instrument enabling government control. All the various provisions that we will see, some of them under Section A, Chapter 3A, all of them, they will eventually allow the state to have a control over it if even slightest of the paperwork is not done. How? Automatic cessation of registration. So there is a section 14B which introduces a concept of automatic cessation ending of the FCRA regulation. We had discussed that. We had seen that here as well, right? That cessation of if application renewal was not made, etc. Registration can cease if renewal is denied, renewal applications are delayed, organizations fail to apply within the prescribed time limit. As a result, the organizations may become inactive and because they have not been able to fulfill the administrative or the bureaucratic requirements. Okay, so what it can do, it can basically give increased power to the bureaucrats, right? The IS officers who are sitting at the helm. Now they have the discretion. They can have the discretion to, let's suppose, delay the approval process. Now, if the approval process in itself is delayed and the expiry date passes, then the registration can cease to exist, and after that, any kind of work thereby can not be functioned, right? Asset vesting and confiscation concerns. Now, this is a provision under Section 16. Now, you don't need to remember this section, Chapter 3A, Section 16A, Section 14. You don't need to remember that. This is just for your reference sakes. Okay. Now, if the organization's FCRA registration is cancelled, surrendered, or deemed to have ceased, foreign contribution and assets derived from them till then, that point of time, automatically gets vested in the government designated authority. Means what? Let's suppose there is an NGO A, right? Now it is getting some foreign contributions, X dollars. Okay. Now, here, if let's suppose, because of the previous provision that we saw, that registration renewal does not happen. So the registration, it basically will be cancelled, isn't it? No registration. So whatever assets it had, A, whatever assets it had, it will automatically get rerouted to the government authority. That means one bureaucratic hurdle can render the NGO completely non-functional even for future. Imagine if, let's suppose, there was an issue in the paperwork. My registration got cancelled. Okay. But if all the assets are already divested or diluted, then how will I ever think about coming back up again? I will have to go through the entire judicial process, appeals, etc. Again, remember this process is the punishment, right? Now, this can occur without prior judicial review, without independent adjudication. Okay. The designated authority can manage, transfer, or dispose of these assets, and that will be credited to the Consolidated Fund of India. The areas of concern that many of these charitable institutions they work in very noble cause, right? Minority upliftment, You have many of the Christian missionary NGOs which are working, which are completely dependent on the foreign funding. So, schools, hospitals, orphanages, religious institutions, community welfare program, and they have tangible assets, land, buildings, vehicles. Now, if that is vested by the government, vested into the government-backed authority, then they have no place to spring back up again. So, this is a case of where sometimes the term which is used, the doctrine of chilling effect. Now, whereby, let's suppose if an NGO does some work and you have not been on the good side of the government, right? The government can easily take these stringent actions against you and can render the rest of them to be in line. So that is the chilling effect that it can cause. It can also impact, excuse me, it can also impact the larger population which is being benefited, larger population which is getting government's argument is that it is done in order to ensure that money laundering, black market economy, that is completely crippled, right? So that people are not using this NGO route to establish shell companies and are not using this in order to bring back tainted money in India. Because there have been evident and proven cases where NGOs have been used to take donations. Even now, by the way, just to tell you, there are many of the people who, when you ask them that how would they like to be paid, they ask you that pay us in that NGO account. They would have an NGO or two. So it is used, but the innocent ones will also get targeted because of this. What do you think should be the overall aspect? Whether this new legislation is or amendment is appropriate, or is the government justified, or is the government not justified? Do let me know. Your opinion also matters. Do let me know in the comment section. Now, expanded executive power. So here, the authority can take control of the assets, manage the educational and the other healthcare institutions which have been established, oversee the finances, and alter the operations in public interest. Now, public interest is a very large term. Anything and everything can be cited under public interest. So that is where, again, this vague aspects leave multiple areas of discretion where the article argues that there will be a kind of a discrimination or a bias which will be done. Increased government oversight during investigations. Now, executive control during suspension and investigation. Organizations may be prevented from managing their own assets without prior approval. Okay. So, as a consequence of this, the entire regulations have become more strict. In a nutshell, regulations have become more strict. The functions carried out by the institutions, they are at risk, and eventually the compliance burden will increase, right? Mind you, compliance burden for these NGOs, when it increases, compliance burden is set to increase. At the same time, your administrative cost has to be reduced. Administrative cost has to be reduced. Okay. So, this is where the implementation is the key here, and also proper regulation of how it is done. Okay. The chilling effect is basically the case. What is the chilling effect doctrine? So, basically, let's suppose, in simplest of the terms, let's suppose there are five individuals, right? Five students. Now, I am teaching them something. One of them asked a doubt that I have not understood anything. Now, if I scold that individual, I punish that individual, the rest four of them will never ask a doubt. That is chilling effect, right? It is used in order for public intimidation, in the case of media suppression, in the case of the activist intimidation, all of those. So that is the chilling effect, right? And then will it affect the genuine NGOs? The genuine NGOs who are dependent on foreign contributions, it can impact them. Okay. Now, Then coming on to the next article, implementation complete but workers still vulnerable. This is about the implementation of the new labor code. Now, Indian economy has been requiring a set of reforms. Various parliamentary committees, the various different corporate committees, recommendations from larger houses like like Morgan Stanley, BlackRock, all of them, IMF, World Bank, everyone has been suggesting that India needs to carry structural reforms in order to have the next phase of economic growth possible. Now, one of the very important structural reforms that is always advised to India is the case of the labor code reform. Now, there are four labor codes. We will take a look into them. Now, the implementation of the new labor codes has been notified. But the article argues that there are multiple lacunae, multiple areas which need to be relooked at, and the implementation again can be problematic in this. For you, it is important to be aware about where those lacunae lie. So, in a summarized manner, point wise manner, let us talk about that. Okay, so first of all, notification of the rules for the four labor codes in May. Implementation framework of India's labor laws are now complete. Which are the labor laws? Code on wages, industrial relations code, code on social security, occupational safety, health, and working conditions code 2020. Yesterday, we talked about the industrial disasters and industrial accidents. The last one deals with that. So these are the four new labor codes. We don't go into the details and the depth of it because obviously not very relevant. You won't be able to retain that also. So just only let us focus on the criticism which is presented in the article. So what are the various criticisms? Concerns regarding fixed term employment. Right. Now here, the Industrial Relations Code has introduced a term that is fixed term employment. What does that mean? So FTE basically, suppose you are employed somewhere in a non-contractual base, right? You are a full-time employee, right? But here the term fixed term, right? What is fixed term? For what duration should that term be? That is not 2 years, 5 years, 6 months, 10 years. That is not clearly defined. Okay. Now, full-time employees and fixed-term employee concept has existed in our country for a long period of time. Right? Any organization that you are a permanent employee of, you are a fixed term employee. But then here, it does not prescribe the minimum tenure, does not limit the number of contract renewals. So, what does that mean? Workers here may face repeated short term contract renewals, right? And employers may avoid offering permanent employers employment at all. So, what the employers can do is employers will only have contractual workers, contractual workers, not as full time employees, but let's suppose I have a contract for 1 year. Now, many of the provisions that I would have otherwise provided to the full time employee, I won't provide to the contractual worker. If my requirement continues, I will repeat the contract next year. Otherwise, I will cancel the contract, reducing my overall welfare requirement, welfare burden, etc. Now, who will benefit because of this? The employers definitely will have an ease of doing business. But when it comes to the workers, can be impacted. Then, weakness is wage determination. The code on wages rules provide a vague definition of what is considered a floor wage, right? And what is a floor wage? What is a minimum wage? The new codes have not created a substantial amount of distinction. Now, in deciding these kind of wages, consultation with the states is mandated. But how that consultation should happen, who will consult from center, who will consult with the state, not clearly defined. Then, gender bias, even in wage calculations, we talk about the case of women empowerment, right? So, here, methodology is assuming a four-member family consisting of three consumption units, adult male is assigned a weight of 1.0 and adult female is assigned a weight of 0.8 under calculation of the wages. So here, adult female is given a less weightage. So let's suppose in a family, you have more adult females as compared to adult males. Overall, the component of calculating the wage will be disadvantageous for the female dominant family. Okay, so that is again a kind of a generic conclusion which has been made, and that is indicative of gender bias. Problems with the hourly wage calculation. Okay. Now here, basically, hourly wages by dividing the daily wage by 8. That is how you calculate. So whatever is your daily wage, right? Simply divided by 8. The concept is that you are working for 8 hours a day. So my hourly wage will be for 8 hours a day. After that, you can work anywhere else. But to think about it, the workers who are spending 8 hours, right, including the break and including the commute, let's suppose they are already spending around 10 hours in a particular workplace, they might not find employment anywhere else. They might not find reasonable job opportunities anywhere else. So hourly wages should be determined independently rather than simple division. You fix the hourly wage. Many of the countries across the Western Hemisphere, they have that. They have fixed the hourly wage, right? And that hourly wage, it basically varies. For example, in US, it does vary from one state to another. But once that hourly wage is fixed, the worker is then able to take a conscious decision that I will work for this many hours here, that many hours here, and so on. It cannot be the daily wage divided by it. So that is where our entire approach to the way providing wage is flawed, as per the article. Okay. Now, sadly, for reading for UPSC, you don't get the hourly wage. Life would have been beautiful, isn't it? Now, issue is significant because of the growth of domestic work and also the gig-based economy, the platform-based economy. Kiran Mazumdar Shaw, the founder of one of the largest pharma firms in our country, she famously tweeted a couple of days back that we are turning into a country of delivery agents and delivery boys. Now, what does that indicate? That gig work is on the rise. Now, in the gig case of the gig work, it is important for you, if you have to remunerate the workers, to provide a concept of hourly wage. Okay. Now, gig and platform workers remain unprotected overall from what? In terms of the kind of protections that you have, social service protection, social security protections, etc. So here, these workers continued to be treated as self employed rather than employees. So, as a consequence, remain outside the labor protection, the social security parameters, etc. That is something which is left to the states. In all fairness, the states can also bring in the code and they can provide the social security. Rajasthan did it. So, like that, many states can do it if required. Tamil Nadu is making efforts to ease the conditions of the gig workers as well, right? So here, the rules fail to specify mechanisms for implementing gratuity related protections as is thought about in the Social Security Code. Then, occupational safety and contract labor concerns. Occupational safety is very important. Industrial disasters are on the rise. Yesterday, we discussed about Vizag and the Surat case. Now, here, they provide general safety and welfare provision. However, housing facilities, medical facilities for plantation workers, many of the times they suffer from issues which are unfathomable in the 21st century. Snake bites, for example. I hope you are aware that in many of the plantation works, you basically have the case where snake bites become one of the leading causes of deaths, premature deaths, because those are present in such remote areas. Carrying them basically or bringing them to the proper health care already is time taking aspect and it is too late. So that is where they fail to clearly define activities for which contract labor can be employed. Distinction between core and non core activities is not clearly defined. Now, what it does, this basically facilitates or allows the employers to hire contractual workers again. Now, contractual workers, the problem with that is there is lack of enough training. Lack of training. Organization clearly won't invest so much. Okay, invest so much in training of the contractual workers who they know they are going to remove after 6 months or 1 year. So as a consequence, you have the lack of expertise in handling many of the equipments also, and that can lead to disaster. Unskilled labor, yes, that will happen. Now, understand this, that this can also basically why these codes are being pushed, and why is it that from IMF to the World Bank to the case of Morgan Stanley, BlackRock, everyone is talking about implementation of the codes, and they had been asking the government to implement and reform the labor codes. Is it the case that everyone was conspiring, the entire world was conspiring and thinking about it, that let's come up with a plan how to exploit the labor force in India? Was that the case? Obviously not. That cannot be the case. Why will the World Bank have any issue with Indian labor force? The answer is very simple here. When we talk about running an organization, right, a larger organization, in that particular case, India is considered to be very unfriendly for any industrialist or any business person to operate, because hiring and firing is considered to be very difficult. If you have a workforce of more than 100, hiring and firing almost becomes impossible. So that is where you have to ensure that basically it becomes easier to conduct business and set up newer business. You cannot be held back because of these stringent rules. Also, the aspect of the trade union. Now, regarding the concept of the trade union, now labor codes have slightly tried to reduce the power. Okay, so it is to boost the economic activity. Setting up of the business becomes easier, but at the same time, worker welfare should also be addressed and cannot be. That is the two sides of the argument. Okay, then India's labor codes need to facilitate the ease of work. Elaborate in the light of the implementation of new labor code. 10 marks. In this, how do you write? Basically, you basically start the introduction of that labor codes need to facilitate the ease of work. India adds millions of people to the workforce, to the labor force every year. Out of them, out of that large labor force, few of them find job opportunities. There is a growing scale of gig work employment and the informal sector employment in our country. Then switch on to the body. Then start talking about the importance of having these labor codes. Okay, importance of labor codes for setting up of the business, for establishing the kind of ease of operation, profit generation, expansion, and investment, so on. But immediately after that, switch on to the main theme of the question. Main theme of the question is what? Ease of work. That means your answer in the later part of the body or the mid part of the body has to be worker centric. Worker centric. Okay. So that is where you start talking about that there are certain lacuna. For example, the gig work, for example, gender bias, for example, lack of hourly wages, for example, the occupational and the safety health measures not being properly implemented, all these, lack of enough social security protection. You mentioned that. Eventually, the conclusion has to be that economic development cannot be ensured without active labor participation in our country, even that is very less. So, as a consequence, we need to, or due to this, we need to provide a greater effort, a greater fillip into ensuring that the workplace is made to be such a place where the workers are willing to work, not forced to work. That is where the human capital can be properly extracted. Okay. Now, 10 laws of the land. This is a kind of a political article, but not very appropriate or relevant for the examination. But why do we still consider it? Because of the Rajya Sabha nomination. Very briefly, let's talk about it. We won't go into the case of the politics associated. So, what is this case about? This case is about the Rajya Sabha elections. Rajya Sabha. Okay. Now, Rajya Sabha elections which are happening for the state of Madhya Pradesh. Okay. In this, you had one of the candidates by the opposition, that is Congress. So, you had one of the candidates provided by Congress. Now, that candidate basically, Meenakshi Natarajan. Now, Meenakshi Natarajan, right? Let's use the initials. Now, Meenakshi Natarajan filed the nomination. Now, that nomination was rejected. Nomination itself was rejected. Why was the nomination rejected? The nomination was rejected because it was cited that she failed to disclose the existing cases against her. Okay. So here, failure to disclose existing cases. Okay. Now, what does the law tell us about it? So, this is something which is actually governed by Section 33A. Section 33A of Representations of People Act. Okay. Now, what does it mandate? It tells us that you have to mandatorily in your election affidavit, right? That is how you nominate nomination affidavit is there. So in the affidavit, you have to mention those particular cases wherever the penalty or the conviction where it has been already you have been convicted, or in cases where the punishment is 2 years, right? So only of those cases, only of those cases in which charges have been framed already, have been framed, okay, and the case in which punishment of 2 years or more. Those cases have to be declared. Now, what is this case against Meenakshi Natarajan that she did not declare? Now, Meenakshi Natarajan being the AICC, All India Congress Committee Chief, Telangana. Now, she had a pending case which was filed by another political party's worker. Now, that political party's worker, so understand this, you do have a political party, let's suppose, right? Now, that political party's worker had filed a case against one individual Congress member, right? Now, Meenakshi Natarajan being the head of AICC, the case also named her that she has not taken appropriate action against this person A. That is where she was named. The article argues that this is not a sufficient backdrop to reject the nomination. The article argues that if that is the case for rejection of the nomination, then every member should also file the cases for traffic violations, which they don't, any kind of license violations, which they don't. Because as per Section 33A of the RPA, Representations of People Act, Charges should already have been framed, which is not done in this case. Charges have not been framed. Punishment of minimum 2+ years, which is also the article argues these. The article also argues that in the same Rajya Sabha elections in other places, there have been instances in recent times where the person who is standing for the election, the returning officer has basically given time to correct the mistakes in the affidavit and file it again. So, if that has been the norm followed somewhere else, why the exception in the region of Madhya Pradesh? This has led to a substantial amount of a political outcry. The opposition is up in arms, and that is what you will be observing in the next few weeks, spanning across the country. Now, this is the matter which has been taken in front of the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court is supposed to hear the matter today. Okay, so you can expect the outcome, some amount of outcome tomorrow. But this is the overall aspect of the rejection of the Rajya Sabha elections. And after this, the ruling party's candidates, they won unopposed the three seats in Madhya Pradesh. The ruling party candidates, they won unopposed. So Supreme Court will be hearing the matter today, and the outcome is where you can understand the stance of the Supreme Court. Now, should India incentivize bigger families? Now, this is basically the case of a discussion, a Q&A associated with the expansion of the families. Now, this follows the debate which is going in our country. There are debates associated with North versus South, associated with delimitation, right? That because the northern states have got greater population, so they will get larger amount of seats. Southern states have lesser population, they will get lesser amount of seats. The second aspect is the case where Andhra Pradesh has started or has planned the cash incentive of 30,000 to 40,000 rupees for family expansion. So that is the article about. So whether we should incentivize big families or not. So what are the discussions? Discussions is discussion is why expanding families? Why the debate around larger families? Okay. Now, there are two aspects to it. One aspect of delimitation, where the southern states have a grievance that their seats would be reduced because the population is declining. Mind you, India's population, the fertility rate has been now 1.9. Even Elon Musk tweeted about it. Now, what is the aspect or what is the indication out of it that fertility rate, total fertility rate has reduced to 1.9? Replacement level fertility rate is 2.1. That means fertility rate, for those of us who are unaware, is the average number of kids that any mother is going to have in her reproductive age. That is fertility. So if the fertility rate is 2.1, it is considered to be the replacement level fertility. That means the population is not going to increase, is not going to decrease. The population is going to replicate itself. The number is going to replicate itself. Anything above 2.1 means the population is expanding. For example, in certain districts of Odisha, certain districts of Bihar, in certain districts of Uttar Pradesh, fertility rate is 2.5, 2.6, right? But across the country, the fertility rate has declined to 1.9. In many of the southern states, the fertility rate has reduced to 1.3 to 1.6, which tells you that they have a declining population. Now, this declining population basically means the argument is now that delimitation aspect is going to happen. It is inevitable. It is not if it will happen, it is about when it will happen. Now, here, basically, once this delimitation does happen, Now, the southern states have a grievance that because they were able to control their population in time, now these southern states, are going to suffer because of lesser seats in comparison to the northern states. But here, the argument of suddenly boosting the population falls flat. Why? Because even if you start providing financial incentives to the families that now increase your population, the outcome of it will be visible somewhere, let's suppose, 2 decades later. By that point of time, delimitation would have been executed, fresher delimitation requirements would have come. So, this political argument does not basically back the case for larger families. Then, Andhra Pradesh is somewhere, Andhra Pradesh has also put out the cash incentive, citing that there is a decline in the labor. Right? That is why, rather than being dependent on the migrant labor, we want to have our own labor. Again, providing cash incentives is not going to increase the population outcome uniformly across the entirety of the society. When you provide cash incentives for having more kids, who will it allow for to have more kids? Or who will it attract? Someone who is at a per capita, let's suppose, of 10 lakh and above. Will they fall for the, or will they be attracted or lured by the cash incentive of 40,000 or 30,000? Obviously not. Someone who is at the lower end of the economic spectrum, they will be motivated. So, in a way, what you are doing is you are basically burdening the lower strata of the society, right? Economic strata, by that I mean. Now, this will never lead to a uniform growth of population, a healthy growth of population. This will always lead to a sectionalized growth of population, so to say. Now, here, that is why cash incentives are not very good. Now, the article or the Q&A argues that in always the economically developed region, the fertility rate always reduce. Okay, fertility rate always reduce. This is something that we study in geography under the demographic transition theory. I hope you would have studied that as well. Whereas the economic growth does happen, the fertility rate always declines. Why? Because with the economic growth, everyone, when they start earning, now that is when the literacy also comes in, education comes in. That is where, in many of the cases, the marriages are also delayed, right? Rather than getting married early, people get married slightly later, so they have limited number of kids. And when the economy is poor, the mindset of the society is that if we have more number of kids, all of them will contribute to the household income, we will become prosperous. When you are already economically prosperous, that is not a driving factor for you. So that is why you have lesser kids. Then, when you are economically prosperous, you tend to invest in the kids more in terms of education, healthcare, and so on. So, per child expenditure is so very high that oftentimes the families, they don't take a decision to have multiple children. Also, with economic prosperity, generally female literacy and female healthcare is also provided attention to. Once the female healthcare is provided attention to, some of the aspects, for example, requirement of a minimum 2 year gap between the kids, these kind of requirements for female health, they are paid attention. Female, they slightly start paying attention to the career aspect, even though in our case, we are, as UPSC had also asked a question, that Indian women, they are faced with a double burden of family as well as workforce. So, still, as they concentrate even slightly on workforce, that is where the fertility rate reduces. So, always the case, economically developed regions, the fertility rate reduces. Various different countries, from France to Poland to Russia, European nations, South Korea. in Asia, all of them have tried, experimented with providing incentive to have more number of kids. Reverting the fertility rate trend becomes very rare or almost impossible. So, what should be done if you want to actually have a replacement level population rate? What should be done? What should be the way forward? One should take care of the child care facility, right? Child care facilities. Okay. Better participation rate of or basically women workforce attendance becomes slightly convenient. Okay. So better workplaces for women, workplaces. Then education, quality and cheap education. Okay. Nutritional support at larger scale so that healthcare expenditure reduces. If these measures are taken, that is when you can have a kind of a greater or a healthy growth in population. Economic prosperity is where you have to balance this. Okay. Then coming on to one of the articles which talks about the changing structure in the Nicobar Islands. So basically, in the region of the Nicobar Islands, which is dominated by the tribal population, you have a very still a structured method or a customary method of selecting the captains and the tribal council. Now, the administration basically has uh, floated a proposal whereby they talk about formalizing the method of election in Andaman Nicobar Islands also, just like it is done in the rest of the country. Why? Because there have been cases where election or the selection of the village head or the tribal head that has not been transparent. Their tenure is not fixed. Communication with the administration becomes difficult. Understanding the grievances becomes difficult. So development becomes a far away dream. In order to smoothen these bureaucratic hurdles, in order to smoothen these administrative issues, that is why the administration has been floating this. That is the purpose. Okay. So the context: administration of Andaman and Nicobar Islands has proposed a formal electoral framework for the Nicobarese Tribal Council. Okay. It seeks to introduce elections similar to those conducted elsewhere, including delimitation of constituencies, preparation of electoral rolls, reservation of seats, and formal voting procedures. Okay. So all of that, that is the process that you follow everywhere. Similar methodology to be followed in Nicobar also. What is the present condition? You should be aware about that as well. I'm sure many of you are not aware about what is the present condition for the tribal council in Nicobar. They have substantial amount of autonomy, right? So Nicobarese, they are the scheduled tribe population, approximately 30,000 people inhabiting the region. They are based, their traditional governance is based on the tribal council that has existed for decades. Now, that is derived from the tribal councils, derived from the tribal customs and the community practices, administrative recognition under Andaman and Nicobar Island Regulation, specific regulation promulgated in 2009, and they enjoy substantial autonomy. Okay. Leaders traditionally they are selected based on consensus. Everyone comes together, the community consults amongst each other, and that is when you have the village meetings and the village head is decided. Okay. It is not based on the formal electoral method that you follow in the rest of the country where there is intense and immense competition. So, village captains traditionally derive legitimacy from social acceptance, community consultation, and consensus building. That becomes very important. Now, what is the new proposal? The new proposal of is basically will lay down procedure for conducting elections to village and tribal councils, defining constituencies where these elections will happen and the eligibility of the voters, nomination and the withdrawal of the candidates, reservation of seats for women, duties and responsibilities for the elected representatives as well. That is the draft proposal. Simple terms, what you observe in the rest of the country. Now, the tribal council, the structure is there. The aim is to have a unified or a uniform kind of a structure of the tribal council in different places. So each village would elect a chief captain, a vice chief captain, and several first captains, the distribution of power. Now, they would together form the Island Tribal Council. The Island Tribal Council, basically chief captain, vice chief captain, and first captains from the villages across the island to establish a constituency based representative so that each can they threadbare the issues that their constituency or their region is facing. That is the proposed structure. The concerns that it will bring about the case of competition, competition, right, rather than consensus. Consensus. Then tribal customs can be ignored. Customs can be ignored. Okay, that is a big fear. Then, other than that, there is another fear that basically when you reduce it to electorates, right, that is where the cooperation also can reduce amongst the various individuals, amongst the various factions. So there can be a development of factionalism. Okay, that is, and the rest of the issues that you have with the electoral process that also basically exists. Removal of, or rather than removal, erosion of autonomy. Of autonomy. Okay, this is also one of the major problems. But there are certain upsides also. Here, you can have developmental requirements which are fulfilled. Developmental requirements. Then, transparency in terms of how they have been elected, where they have been elected, who to communicate. So, administration becomes easier. Administration becomes efficient. Okay, area based development can happen. Or erosion of autonomy. Right now, the tribal councils, they are quite autonomous. Their fear is that if we have this intervention and the structured form of elections, then how we elect the village head, that will be out of the window. We will have to follow a certain process. So that is again taking away my autonomy. Okay. Then some of the articles very quickly relevant for your prelims. Now, Prime Minister is slated to have a visit to France and Slovakia. Now, France is where we are buying the 114 Rafale jets. Now, this is where the agreement and the deal has been facing certain turbulences owing to the sharing of the source code, the pricing aspect of it. Now, France has said that we will adhere to the Make in India principle, and that, as per the proposal, what is expected by the Indian defense industry is substantial amount of these Rafale jets to be manufactured in India. Okay, so that over a period of time, our ecosystem for the jet manufacturing also develops, and we have our own indigenous ancillary industries which do work for some or the other projects. Okay. Now, why is the Prime Minister slated to visit France? It is on the sidelines of the G7 summit. On the sidelines of G7 summits, you had Emmanuel Macron, who has invited India to be a participant in G7. So that is why, and it is here again, depending upon the mood and the availability of Mr. Trump, one of the chance encounters with the US president is slated to happen. So that is going to be interesting, right? It is tomorrow and day after tomorrow. That is the visit when it is going to happen. Now, India likely to be invited to join Hormuz Security Initiative. So here, basically, again, on the sidelines of the G7 summit meeting, it is expected that leaders from India, then US, Qatar, Saudi Arabia, and UAE, right? France obviously is going to helm that meeting. So France becomes important. These countries together will sit for the West Asia Security, okay, on the sidelines of G7. So that is where about the peace initiative across the region of Strait of Hormuz, India will form one of those security uh, coalition is the expectation of France. We have to wait and see what is India's stance in this case. Indian textile sector witnessing revival of investments. Now, this is associated with the textile and the clothing industry. Now, the textile and the clothing industry, the demand has increased, right? Barring the recent West Asia crisis, but overall the demand has increased, driven by markets such as UK and so on. Now, there has been some problems in the Indian textile sector that you should be aware about. When it comes to the textile, one of the largest textile sectors in our country is the cotton textile. Now, from being one of the largest producers of cotton across the world, where the farmers were fed up with the surplus amount, India has been cotton deficient in recent. And when we say cotton deficient means we do not have enough cotton production. Our cotton production yield per hectare, etc., has continuously declined. So, from self sufficiency, we have become import dependent in cotton production. And why is that? Because we had introduced, when did we become the larger producers of cotton? When we introduced the genetically modified BT cotton, our yield, our overall production, quality, everything increased suddenly. But then, due to the kind of debates that we have, the kind of discussions that we have in our country, that do we need this genetic modified crops or not? Still, there is a large section of population who says that it is absolutely bad. You will be slave of the corporate and so on and so forth. Now, as a consequence of that, the government has not implemented the upgradation of this genetic modification. Now, the pests and the various other, uh, the rodent and the pest attacks, which earlier would reduce the cotton yield, those attacks had reduced with the BT cotton. Now, over a period of time, the pests, the insects, all of them, they have gotten used to it. Pink bollworm being one of them. So, as a consequence of that, again, now this BT cotton is as vulnerable as the earlier variety to pest attacks. Okay, insect and the pest attacks. Now, as a consequence, your yield per hectare has declined quite substantially. That is why you will observe that while we have become import dependent, the government has been reducing the import duties, has removed the import duty. Now, earlier the government didn't want to remove the import duty because it wanted the domestic consumption to happen of the cotton product. But very soon the textile manufacturers conveyed to the government that look, we are not producing enough. So where do I get the raw material for my textile industry? So that is when the government has removed the import duties. As a consequence of that, the imports have started flowing in large numbers. And these imports have now fueled the raw material requirements of the cotton textile, driven by the demand in UK and so on. This has led to a kind of a virtuous investment cycle, capacity expansion, technology upgradation in many of the textile industry, which is going to generate more jobs in the sector. Okay. Now, after this, center lifts excise duty on higher ethanol blend petrol. So basically, the higher ethanol blend, 20%, 27%, those kind of blended petrol, on that excise duty has been removed. The reason is simple: to avoid double taxation. Double taxation. How? To understand this. So you basically have petrol. How is ethanol blend produced? And you have ethanol which is produced. Okay. Both of them are then mixed in different proportion to have the ethanol blended petroleum. Right. Now, the government already charges excise duty on this. The government already charges GST on this. On top of that, till now, you had an excise duty on this as well. So that meant you are charging the same product twice. You are taxing the same product twice. So that is where what the government has done. It has removed this excise duty. Okay, so that double taxation is not done. It becomes affordable and more people come into the sector. It brings about greater revenue for the sugarcane growing. Then some of the articles relevant for your PIB. Now, this is an article from where fact-based prelims questions can be asked. This is about the horticultural area and the horticultural production. You have the second advanced estimates of 25-26, right? So basically, the total horticultural area. So here, first advance. So you have 301.51 lakh hectares, almost similar to the year of 24-25. Almost similar. Then production in lakh tons. This has increased to almost 3,777 lakh tons. Okay. So that basically means roughly around 377 million tons. So this is again a marginal increase. Then you have some of the facts, for example, which you can take a look at it when the PDF will be available to you. So this, repeat it, revise it over a period of time. So production of fruits expected to increase by 3.25%. Okay. Area under vegetable cultivation expected to increase by 0.75%, right? Then here, area under onion cultivation expected to increase by 2%. These aspects, just note it down in a piece of paper, use that for revision. Then, India and Nepal launch cross-border remittance mechanism to strengthen bilateral financial connectivity or P2P transfers, okay, and direct linkage of India's UPI and Nepal's NPI, National Payments Interface. So it basically will have enhanced traveler convenience. Tourism can be boosted, right? So you don't need to carry enough amount of cash. Economic boost for local merchants, operational efficiency for business community, real-time direct transfers will also happen. So this will also make UPI more prevalent, more implementable, and that is where it will be beneficial. Okay? And this will have digital financial connectivity. Yesterday we discussed about how, I think day before yesterday, that entire Southeast Asia is one of the least economically connected regions across various geographies of the world. So that is where this is a welcome step. Then Oilseed Kisan Mitra. This is an initiative by Ministry of Agriculture and Farmers Welfare. What is this? So it is basically a multilingual 24/7 research based service, right? And it is multilingual. So it basically follows a kind of a WhatsApp model. So farmers basically, they can send a WhatsApp, ask questions in any of the Indian language. AI tools will be used in order to disseminate the information and answers. So in this particular case, oilseed is where we need to increase our production. We are import dependent. That is where the loss of crops due to various attacks, etc., that can be prevented. It is a disseminated method of information delivery. Then 13th BRICS Urbanization Forum under India's chairship began in New Delhi about resilient and urban infrastructure features. So Brazil, Russia, Indonesia, India, China, South Africa, Egypt, Ethiopia, Iran, and UAE, they are discussing about the urban infrastructure and how urban infrastructure can help us achieve sustained development over a longer time period. So that is basically the BRICS Urbanization Forum. Where was it held? Because this year you had a question about where this BRICS meeting was held, where that BRICS meeting was held. That was a question in prelims. So this is where you find those kind of sources. Last article, that is about the network survey vehicle. What is a network survey vehicle? So these network survey vehicles, they are changing the ways that Indian highways operate. So they basically use laser profilers, GPS, imaging technology, right? And it scans the surface roads for potholes, for any glitches, construction issues, etc. Now, as a consequence of that, they do cover a substantial distance from 80 to 300 kilometer every day. And here they basically transmit that information that where a highway needs maintenance, where a problem does exist. So AI powered highway monitoring for smarter maintenance, quality assurance can be done, and here available across every language as well, from busy freight corridors to traffic heavy aspects. Now, who controls this network survey vehicle? Ministry of Road Transport and Highways. Very prelim centric. Okay. So that brings us to the end of the discussion for the day. And I hope the session has been helpful and has been productive. If you have liked the session and I've asked your opinion regarding one of the queries associated with the FCRA, let us know in the comments section. And don't forget to click on the like, share, and the subscribe button. Till we meet again, take care. Goodbye. Thank you.